Thank you very much. My name is Tobias Anderberg. I work for a Stockholm-based company called Agical. I moved here 7 years ago to Kristianstad. I'm here to talk about being introvert on an Agile team. The logo for Agile India here is because I'm using the same presentation that I'm going to do in 1 week in India at the Agile conference there. So you're sort of like my test subjects here. So please give feedback afterwards. So this is a little bit more about me. As I said, I'm working for Agical as a developer and a coach, consultant. I live in Kristianstad in a very old house from the 1880s with my wife and 3 kids. And I also run a podcast called Väg 74. It's not here? There it is. Together with my colleague Ola Ellnestam. And apart from this, I'm also an introvert. And so here I am. Sounds like a good idea. I built this talk around the hypothesis that if we understand a little bit more how introvert people work, we can make some adjustments to our daily work and make everyone a little bit better at their work. Make everyone awesome, as I said here. So this is the agenda. I will start to talk a little bit about intro and extraversion, the differences between them. Then I will dig into the science of introversion. I will talk a bit about psychological safety, which is very important. And I'll finish off with some agile practices for introverts that work very good for introverts. So, introversion. It was mentioned first by Carl Jung in 1921 in a book called Psychological Types. It is a trait which is a part of personality that is relatively stable over time. So you're basically born with it and it doesn't change as you grow and you can't sort of work it away. It's one of the big 5 personality traits, which you can abbreviate them with CANOE, where C stands for conscientiousness, and A stands for agreeableness, the N stands for neuroticism, the O openness, and the E extraversion, which is how extroverted you are. And this is one important thing. It is not the same as shyness, because shyness is a fear of social judgment. And it's often linked to low self-esteem, which introversion is not. So simplified, you can say that introverts gain energy from spending time alone, while extroverts gain energy from being around other people. So we're going to dig a bit into this. Well, introverts prefer spending time alone, while extroverts generally get energized by large groups of people. Introverts are not antisocial, but they have they prefer smaller groups of friends, while extroverts often have very, very large number of friends. So most friends on Facebook wins, right? Introverts are very quiet, but often has a very rich inner monologue. And they are quite drained from socializing. We spend a lot of energy while socializing, and we might suffer from something called the introvert hangover, which is if you've been socializing for too long, you're sort of overspent, and then it might take quite some time to regain enough energy to be around people again, which can be quite hard in like weekly long conferences that I'll be in next week. We hate small talk, but we love deep, meaningful conversation. We also prefer written communication to verbal. So many of us don't like speaking on phone, for instance. I hate speaking on the telephone. Extroverted people, they thrive in a social or networking environment. Introverts tend to be quiet at meetings and keep their ideas for themselves, which is a bad thing, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind, getting the introverts to talk at meetings. Extroverts are often very talkative and likes to share their ideas and thoughts. We introverts, we seldom make decisions quickly. We tend to run things over thoroughly in our head before deciding. While extroverts are often quite quick to make decisions and share unfinished ideas with their peers. Introverts can concentrate for long periods of time. This is not me, by the way, so everything isn't for everyone, because I am generally quite bad at concentrating for long periods of time, while extroverts are quite easily distracted. Introverts likes to observe and are uninterested in getting attention, while extroverts like to be the center of attention. We often do not like change, which can be very bad in an agile environment, while extroverts are quite fast to accept change. A good thing, though, is that we have an eye for detail and quite easily can spot problems. So this is something we should put into use. We're also very good listeners. So for instance, a Scrum Master is quite good to have an introverted person, because it's good if they're good listeners. We're also very creative when being alone, but in fact, so are extroverts. And I think that no, I don't remember who it was. Oh, never mind. We skip that. Sorry? Okay. Yeah, that's true. So a quick poll. How many of you in here think they are an introvert? Yeah? I'll come to that later. So, science shows that 30 to 50% are introverted. So, I'm going to go into the science of introversion, and we're going to come to exactly that. Jonathan Sheik, who's a psychologist, he invented the STAR model, which defines 4 different shades of introversion. The first shade is social introversion. So a social introvert don't like to be around other people. The sort of standard definition of an introvert prefers to spend time alone. Smaller groups or solitude. And once again, they are not shy, because shyness is anxiety driven, which introversion is not. The second shade of introversion is thinking introversion. This is very strong in my second child, Ines. Our favorite expression at home is Earth calling Ines, because she's always up somewhere in her own fantasy world and never around us. So a thinking introvert is capable of getting lost in sort of a fantasy world. They think very much inside their head and are not so present in the world we live in. The third kind is, or shade, is anxious introversion. And this, I and my young oldest daughter has this very strongly. We tend to go over things in our head over and over and over and over. And when we face some new situation, it's like, okay, in how many ways might I die doing this? So we turn things over and over in our mind. And the fourth kind is restrained introversion. And these are the slow starters. They take some time to get going in the morning. And prefer to think before they act. And all of these are sort of dimensions, so you can have more or less of each. So for me, for instance, as I said, I score quite high on the anxious introversion and on maybe social introversion, but not so much on restrained introversion. And so then some other people might have some other. So in fact, there are a million kinds of introversion. Another thing is that introverts have a less active reward system. Or as human beings, we have some basic rewards. For instance, we need food, otherwise we die. So we sort of get a reward in our brain when we get food. We need sex to become more people. And it turns out that introverts have a less active reward system. So we don't get this sort of buzz when we are rewarded for something. When we anticipate a reward, the brain generates dopamine. And introverts respond differently than extroverts on this dopamine. We also have longer pathways in the brain. So when we receive an external stimuli, like an image or something, more parts of the brain is activated. So it's sort of more deeper processed in our brain. But a negative part of this is that it takes longer for things to process. And this might be one of the reasons why we don't prefer small talk, because we're worse at thinking on the top of our minds, what it's called. Also, many introverts are highly sensitive people, ASP. So they are more sensitive to light and sound, for instance. There's a very interesting experiment that has been made where people got to solve a puzzle while wearing headphones listening to music. And then they got to turn the volume to what they preferred the volume to be. And it turned out that people who identify as introverts generally set the volume much lower than the extroverts. Then they did the experiment again and turned it around. So the introverted people had to use the volume that the extroverts were using, and vice versa. And it turns out that everyone performed worse. So the introverts were overstimulated by the loud music, while the extroverts were understimulated by the lower volume of music. So there seems to be sort of like an optimal stimuli for everyone where they perform the best. Our behavior is affected by situations. In the 40s, I think, there was this theory called Situational Theory among psychologists, which stated that we're basically different personalities based on the situation that we're in. This is not valid anymore. Now we know that we have a fixed personality, but that we might change based on the situation to some extent. So we can stretch our personality, but only to a certain extent. And Susan Cain, she calls this the rubber band theory of personality. And the rubber band is different for different people. Some people can stretch quite long, quite hard, before the rubber band snaps, while others cannot do that so much. And then, as you said, some people are in the middle of the spectrum and are both introvert and extrovert. And these people are called ambiverts. And Carl Jung himself, he said that there's no such thing as a pure introvert or extrovert. Such a person would be in a lunatic asylum. So we might say that we're all ambiverts, but we have a tendency towards one or the other. Okay, let's take a break from the subject, and I'm going to talk about what it's like to live in an old house. We redid our kitchen, and we tore down this wall, and we found a door behind the wall that we didn't know of. Now, it wasn't a secret door to Narnia or something like that, but the fun thing was that it was covered with these old newspapers, so we could see that the door had been shut 1941. And among these papers were an old Kristianstad from 1941. And it's awesome to sit down with a cup of coffee and read the daily news from 1941 about the English U-boat that had been lost, submarine that had been lost, and the mystical voice in German radio that after the newscaster has signed off, he comes in and says that tomorrow the lying starts again. So that's a little bit about my life. So, psychological safety. Psychological safety is one of the quadrants of modern Agile. Who's heard of modern Agile? No one? Oh, one. Two. It's the latest and greatest from Joshua Kerievsky. You can read more about it at modernagile.org. But the blue one here, make safety a prerequisite. Google did this project called Project Aristotle, where they tried to find out what signifies a great team. And they found 5 keys, and one of them was that the team was safe. Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard Business School professor, she defines psychological safety like this: a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Sounds like quite a good thing, right? And in fact, we need to feel safe in order to take risks and to be creative. We also become more open-minded, resilient, and motivated when we feel safe. And if we are safe, then we dare to innovate and experiment. And experiment is how we learn. We need to make experiments, otherwise we won't learn anything. And also, we dare to be ourselves if we are safe around our team members. And this is extra important for introverts because the world today has sort of this extroverted ideal. We are rewarded for being able to speak our mind all the time. So how do we foster safety? Well, let's go to Amy Edmondson again. She says that first of all, we need to frame all work as a learning problem, not as an execution problem, because this sort of signals that everyone's voice needs to be heard. Also, we must acknowledge our own fallibility. No one is perfect, right? We're not superheroes. And if I miss something, then please tell me. We also need to model curiosity. And we do this by asking a lot of questions. Because this creates sort of a need for people to speak up, to generate the answers to the questions. It's also good to trust your coworkers, because if you do, then hopefully they will trust you back. And one of the worst things you can do is play the blame game. That kills safety. Get to know each other. Well, this is one way. Have beer. Or do food. Have lunch together. Talk about something else than work. This is an exercise I borrowed from Esther Derby and Diana Larson, which is personal shields. If every team member draw their own shield, in the middle you put your name, in the green quadrant you put your skills, what you're skilled at. In the blue one you have experience, past experience, what have I worked on before. The yellow one is learning objectives. What do I want to learn from working in this team? And the red one is secrets, sort of things that you generally don't tell people until you've had like 3 glasses of wine, maybe. Things you don't know about me. And finally here you put your own motto. And if you don't have a motto, that's quite hard to come up with. And then you post this in the team room for everyone to see. It's an awesome way to get to know your team members. Another way that this is something I stole from the internet, called affinities, where you team up with, pair up with someone and you ask each other, tell me something you like about me, I don't know about you, and we have in common. And then you switch. And you do this 3 times. And the 3 times, when I've done this, I've found that the 3 times is very important. Because if you just do it 1 time, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and also you have to dig deeper to come up with 3 things. For instance, we have in common. When you've come up with when you need to find the 6th thing you have in common, then something quite interesting might pop up. Okay, agile practices for the introvert. Team size is one thing. The old ideal have been 7 plus minus 2, I think. This is way too high. Smaller is better. 4 to 5 people. 4.5 is the best. So you need to split one. Speaking at meetings, I mentioned that before. So small spontaneous meetings are better than large planned ones. For everyone, but even more so for introverts. The small meetings where like 3 people stand up in front of a flip chart are the best, because everyone will talk in that environment. Cater for remote work. I've changed my opinion about this. Before I said that co-location works best for everyone. But today the technology has gotten so far that we can work remotely quite efficiently. So why not? For some people, it works best to work from home a few days per week, maybe. Some people don't like this. They want to be on site all the time. So let them. But it's good to make it possible to work remotely if you want to. Brainstorming is something we like to do in Agile sometimes. And we need to take advantage of that introverts are more creative on their own, or that everyone is more creative on their own. So let it take time. Instead of sitting in a conference room and trying to brainstorm, post like a flip chart where people pass by a lot, sort of on the way to the coffee machine or on the way to lunch. And post a question, what you want to brainstorm about, and let people post ideas as they pass by. And then they can see what other people have written, fuel their own thinking process, and then go back to their desk and let the process take time, sort of like 2-3 days instead of just one meeting. Retrospects. Well, it's good to sort of send out, if you're gonna have a retrospect around a certain subject, send out the subject beforehand and let people prepare by gathering their data beforehand instead of at the meeting. It favors introverts. Pair programming. Well, introverts favor one-on-one communication. So it works quite well for introverts. But you need to remember to take restorative breaks, because it's quite draining. Mob programming. Who has heard of mob programming? No one? It was invented at Hunter Industries by a guy called Woody Zool. And he defines it this way. Mob programming is a software development approach where the whole team works on the same thing at the same time in the same space and at the same computer. Introvert hell, right? Well, it turns out that it actually works quite well, because it's very easy to take these important breaks. Because if you're the whole team, then if one person starts feeling drained, he or she can just move away for a bit, maybe check their emails and stuff, take a walk. And in fact, one of the original mob programmers on Woody's mob at Hunter, Andy Griffith, he is very introverted, and he has blogged about this. I have a link on the last slide if you want to check it out. And he says that one of the hardest things is, because you're a slow thinker, it's quite easy that the mob runs away from you if you have an idea, because you need to process something in your head. So you need to sort of develop some way to telling the mob that, wait a minute, I have an idea, so don't run away here. Open office is extremely bad for introverts, especially hot desking. It's extremely bad for everyone, I think. but especially introverts. I'm currently at my client. We have this activity-based office, and it's very, very bad. I think that everyone needs sort of a somewhere that they can call their own, or at least the team needs a fixed place where they can post stuff on walls and arrange the furniture the way they want it. And introverts need something called restorative niches, somewhere where they can sort of slip back to regain energy during the day. If they start to feel drained, they need to have some safe place where they can regain this energy. And usually, if it's an open space, then you're stuck with a restroom. I've seen people sort of gathering whiteboards and stuff on wheels to make sort of their own cubicle where they can slip behind and be by themselves. Okay, to summarize. Intro and extraversion is a personality trait that cannot be removed. And our brains actually differ. Sometimes introverts need to be by themselves to regain energy. Please let them. We all need psychological safety. Get to know each other. Favor small team size and do mob programming. Introverts require restorative niches. No hot desking, please. And further reading. Susan Cain's book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. It's also translated to Swedish now. This is also a good book, The Secret Lives of Introverts by Jenny Granman. And here's the blog post that I talked about by Aaron Griffith, sorry. So my Twitter is Tobias Anderberg. This is my mail address, and this is the podcast that I'm running with Ola. You can find it where you find podcasts. Thank you.